Hello, everybody. Here we are at Jazz Sanctuary, Conversation and Tunes. And this YouTube video is about keeping the story of connection. We've been doing these Conversation and Tunes Jazz Sanctuaries during the time of the pandemic with different subjects. And because of where we are as a culture, going through both the pandemic and also the confrontation of all the inequities in our life together, it certainly can be argued that knowing about telling and sharing and keeping going our stories of connection has never been more important. So we want to look at that with some conversation and some tunes today. But I want to start with a prayer by Ted Loder. Some of you may have heard of Ted, minister in Philadelphia area, I think, for many years, who wrote a book of prayers many, many years ago called Gorillas of Grace. I want to read a prayer from that collection. This prayer is called Guide Me into an Unclenched Moment. Gentle me, Holy One, into an unclenched moment. A deep breath, a letting go of heavy expectancies, of shriveling anxieties, of dead certainties. That, softened by the silence, surrounded by the light, and open to the mystery, I may be found by wholeness, upheld by the unfathomable, entranced by the simple, and filled with the joy that is you. Amen. I want to talk with the Wildman Jazz Sanctuary House Band a little bit today about their iteration as the State Street Combo, where they play and have played for many years 2 days a month, the second Sunday and Monday of every month, at a local Mexican restaurant called Hermanos. And I'm going to start with Jock Irvine and ask how many years you guys have done this.
Well, we started almost 23 years ago. We made 22 years back in September before the restaurant closed in March for the coronavirus. What happened was BJ and Eddie and I had been playing in the State Street Rhythm and Blues Band, and we'd been doing a lot of weddings. And as part of a wedding, we were asked to play jazz music for cocktail hour and for dinner music. So we were getting better at jazz, and I heard Hermanos was having live jazz. So what I did was I brought the owner a CD of us playing rhythm and blues. And I said, hey, we can play jazz too, even though there's none on this CD. And she said, we'd love to have you. So go figure. And so we started out, I think we started out Tuesdays and Wednesday nights. And after the first year or so, we switched to Sunday and Mondays. And we've been playing the second Sunday and Monday ever since. Except, like I said, in March, the restaurant closed down. So we haven't been there since March. And you know what I like about it is we don't make a huge amount of money doing it, but I say to people, it's like my poker night. You know, some guys go out and play poker with their friends, once a month or once a week, and they have some food and they hang out and they have a good time. And we do the same thing, except we make music and we get some food and some drinks and we have a good time.
Thank you, Jock. That was Jock Irvine, the bass player, also the producer of this video. And now I'm going to go over to B.J. Steinberg, who was the founder of the State Street R&B band. And I want to ask a little bit about that. It was a great band. It played at my older daughter's wedding many years ago, actually 20 years ago this summer. And just hear a little bit about that band, because it was such a great band.
Well, the band kind of grew out of a gig that I had played with a trio for a retirement party at Luca's Greenhouse in Hampton Falls, New Hampshire. And one of the people who was at the party was Wes Collins, who I was introduced to. And Wes told me that he was a singer and that he did rhythm and blues, Motown, Stax Volt, that sort of stuff, and asked if he could do a couple of songs with us. And I pretty much knew everything that he did. I had to call out changes to the bass player, and the drummer just sort of slagged along. But at that point, we realized that there was some chemistry between he and I in terms of getting the music in place. So fast forward, for the next couple of years, we would do an occasional gig with a pickup band. And at, I guess it was 1989, we decided that we were going to try this for real. And we went through the struggles that bands tend to go through, finding the right people, both personality-wise and capability-wise, to share the band with us. And the band in the local regional area just took off. It was absolutely amazing. I spent a month hounding club owners, function facilities, looking for work. And then suddenly it turned around, and then these people started hounding me to come play at their places. And the rest is kind of history. The band, in its time, did three local CDs. We played the Portsmouth Jazz Festival, all of the local summer concerts, and there's a legacy there. And we still have the book of horn charts. So it doesn't happen every other day, but occasionally we pull them out, and we do some of that music. We did a concert in the driveway a few weeks ago using some of those charts. And I mean, in all, it was a good thing and a very special part of my life.
Thank you, BJ. And finally, our drummer, Ed Raczka, who I always refer to as the spiritual drummer, because he just plays at a level that of communication and connection that's unusual in general, and particularly for drummers. And Eddie, I just want to ask you sort of just what it's been like for you to play for these 22 plus years every month with the same group of guys.
Thank you, Tim. Actually, it's been an incredible experience working with these guys. Working at Hermanos, like they said, it's turned into more of a gathering, like a social gathering for us, and an interaction like a poker game or a boys out type of night or family out. But I'm truly lucky to have been able to experience this specific genre and this specific venue, because there's a lot of players that will never have that opportunity. We have a close-knit, family-tied level association with everybody, with friends, family, that was established through a lot of the time at Hermanos, I've been fortunate to have played with State Street Rhythm and Blues for quite a few years prior. And prior to that, I had actually just come out of playing with the Movers, and I had the opportunity to audition with State Street, which was amazing. So that kind of gave me the opportunities to continue on once State Street converted into what we are now, so it's been very fortunate. I wouldn't switch any of this for anything. It's been very, very fulfilling for me as a drummer to be able to associate and play at the level, and these guys, it doesn't get any better than this. These guys are the best, and and you throw in the mix of the personalities and the closeness, and again, I'm truly blessed to have had that opportunity and continue to do that. Thank you, Tim.
Thank you so much, Ed, and also Jock and BJ. About 10 years ago, I felt more than honored when they allowed me the second set on Monday nights to bring my trumpet and just sit in a little bit and try to be unobtrusive at first, and then maybe eventually even contribute a little bit. And soon thereafter, Jock had to have some back surgery, and so BJ switched to bass guitar. Probably not your favorite instrument, but and I brought my keyboard, and once Jock got back, they couldn't get me out of the band. So I've been with them ever since, and it was really a feeling, a spiritual experience for me to walk into this group of three guys because of the way they play music and because of who they are as human beings, and to be counted among them in this group is one of the greatest honors and joys of my life. Every time we play, we play one set, and then they take us in the back room and they feed us, whatever we want, which is pretty amazing. And we have a half an hour, and we inevitably go right up into the half hour, and Jock says, it's time to play the second set, and he's always the only one who's ready to go play. We say, well, we have to finish our dessert, or we have to wash our hands, or we have to talk to somebody at the bar. So Jock goes out and he starts to play, usually this next piece, Autumn Leaves, on bass guitar. He solos, not an easy thing to do. And eventually, I or BJ will come out and join him, and then Eddie. We kind of wander back in. And so we're going to play for you now a recording that Jock produced a couple of months ago of all of us in our socially distanced homes playing this next piece the way that we would play it if we were at Hermanos. Hope you enjoyed that. Pastor Emilia Halstead, and our fearless leader and vocalist, is away for a much-deserved time of vacation. But she has left herself with us virtually, and next she's going to do a reading, and then is going to sing a cappella a beautiful song. The reading that she chose is from the Gospel of Mark, and it's a really unusual passage in the Gospels and Christian scripture because Jesus is shown to be quite human. A woman comes and asks for healing for her daughter, and Jesus knows that she's not Jewish, that she's not from the people of God as they call themselves. And so his first response is not great. And then you'll hear that the woman prevails. And I call this a story of connection with someone who's different. And this fits to me so much with the confrontation that we're dealing with right now in our culture about how, though we haven't mostly been aware of it, we have distanced instead of connected with those who are different. And so I'd like for you to listen to Emilia reading the story and then singing a beautiful, hopeful song about what, a simple but beautiful song from, of all things, the Muppet movie, about what it means to connect.
From there he set out and went away to the region of Tyre. He entered a house and did not want anyone to know he was there, yet he could not escape notice. But a woman whose little daughter had an unclean spirit immediately heard about him, and she came and bowed down at his feet. Now the woman was a Gentile of Syro-Phoenician origin. She begged him to cast the demon out of her daughter. He said to her, "Let the children be fed first, for it is not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs." But she answered him, "Sir, even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs." Then he said to her, "For saying that, you may go. The demon has left your daughter." So she went home, found the child lying on the bed, and the demon gone.
Why are there so many songs about rainbows? And what's on the other side? Rainbows are visions, they're only illusions. Of rainbows have nothing to hide. So we've been told, and some choose to believe it. But I know they're wrong, wait and see. Someday we'll find it, the rainbow connection, the lovers, the dreamers, and me. Who said that every wish would be heard and answered when wished on the morning star? Somebody thought of that, and someone believed it, and look what it's done so far. What's so amazing that keeps us stargazing? And what do we think we might see? Someday we'll find it, the rainbow connection, the lovers, the dreamers, and me. Have you been half asleep? And have you heard voices? I've heard them calling my name. Is this the sweet sound that calls the young sailors, The voice might be one and the same. I've heard it too many times to ignore it. It's something that I'm supposed to be. Someday we'll find it, the rainbow connection. The lovers, the dreamers, and me. La da da dee da da dum. La da 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 dee da dum.
One of my favorite times at Hermanos is when someone makes a request. One of my favorite request responses might have come from BJ or somebody years ago, who when somebody came up and made a request said, well, you know, we're not going to play that one, but we're going to play a different one that has all the same notes in it. One of my favorite responses. But oftentimes people will ask, do you know anything by Steely Dan? And the piece that we're about to play is in fact a Steely Dan piece. But there's something about the demographic at Hermanos, their age, the music they listened to probably growing up, that when the band plays this song, it kind of creates reliably an instantaneous sense of community. People often stop talking, they listen, and the whole room is sort of in community with each other. And at the end of this one, in places like this, restaurants, that often people don't applaud after each piece. They're talking, and it's sort of, as Jock sometimes says, wallpaper music for some people. But after this song, almost everyone applauds.
You have to just explain what wallpaper music is.
Oh, wallpaper music is that it's just on the walls, not to be noticed.
Music is no louder than the wallpaper.
Music is no louder than the wallpaper. That's good. I totally took that wrongly. Awesome. So enjoy Peg. There's so many ways to talk about connection, and one way that we may not think about, but I would argue is one of the most powerful ways we have of making connection, is making connection with people that aren't here anymore, people that we've lost, people that have been important to us. And that often one of the ways those connections are brought to mind, or we bring them to mind deliberately, is through music. And so I want to talk about a piece that we're going to do next that was written by our own Jock Irvine for the service, probably the most amazing memorial service I've ever been involved at South Congregational Church here in Concord, where Frank was a member and where Jock's a member. And all of us played at the service, and it was an amazing experience. So I want to ask Jock about his experience of writing that music and what it's been like since. And then our dear friend Ron Dieter, who's the camera person, so he's usually on the other side of the camera. But I've asked him because Ron and I were Frank's dear friends and Friday breakfast companions, and the two of us and Jock and his mom planned the service. So I want to ask Ron what that service and the remembering of Frank, Jock's dad, is all about for him. But first, Jock, tell us a little bit about what it was like to write that.
Well, I knew I wanted to write a piece for the service. A love of jazz is something my dad and I shared with each other, and he was never happier when I started playing a lot of jazz. And of course, we were kind of crunched for time, so I didn't have a lot of time to do this. But even before I started the song, I knew I wanted some symbolism in it. So my dad was an ordained minister, so I decided it would be in 3/4 to represent the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. And I decided it would be in a minor key because of the loss of my father. But it also modulates to a major key in the bridge as a celebration of his life and having him with us. And there are also, at the end of the bridge, there's a stop that kind of represents his death. And then the last thing is he absolutely loved Dave Brubeck. And I think a lot of people know the song Take 5. Well, the opening section of this, even though it's not in 5 beats per measure, it's very reminiscent of Take 5. So all those things I kind of had in my head before I even started, and then the rest of it fell together pretty easily.
Thank you, Jock. It's a great song, as you'll hear in a moment. Ron, if you could just talk about what that experience was like for you.
Well, powerful is a great expression, and Jock, as you were just talking about your experience of writing that song, the first thing that came to my mind is that your dad was there helping you put it together, because that was Frank. Generous, thoughtful, greatest sense of humor, and generous. Just the other day I was thinking about my early days of motorcycle riding, and Frank was living down the street, and he offered me his helmet. It was a first gesture. I think he had given up his motorcycle for a boat or something, one way or the other. And as we used to say about Frank, that he asked for very little just so that it was high quality. Talk about when you hold someone in your heart, they are never, ever gone. And so in searching scripture and stories, it was about the celebration of life and the meaning of connection.
Thank you, Ron. It still lives in my memory. It doesn't need to be on YouTube that day. And whenever I think of it, it makes me think, like a million other things do, of Frank, who passed away 4 years ago this month. So this will be our remembrance of and tribute to Frank Irvine. The piece by Jock is called Elegy for My Father. One of the most enduring and obvious and probably earliest in family times, or in human times, kinds of connection is family connection, or tribal connection and family connection. And certainly my brother Jim, who's here on the bench with me, is my older brother, so he's been part of my life since the moment I was born. And certainly for us, music is a really, really important part of our connection, particularly in our retirement years, but always. And that's because we came from a musical family. And I wonder, Jim, if you'd like to just say a word or two about what it was like for you growing up in that musical family.
Our father and mother met in the trumpet section of a community orchestra, is when it all began. My father went on to be a professional jazz musician, played throughout the Midwest with a notable band at the time, Red Nichols. And the band was going to New York, and our mother said to him, because he was staying in connection with her, she was teaching school in Ohio. She said to him, "Howard, if you go to New York, I won't be waiting for you." So thankfully he left the band, and Tim and I are the result of that decision. But both of our parents were wonderful and very talented musicians. In addition to playing the trumpet herself, our mother was a fine pianist and an organist. And together, as well as with our aunt, the three of them led the choir program at our local Methodist church. It was not my father's principal source of income, nor our mother's, who later went back to teaching. But it sustained them, I think, in many ways. And for Tim and me, growing up in that environment, there was always music. Mother might have been playing the piano during the day or accompanying students who were going to musical contests, or my father was, for a number of years, gave music lessons to high school students and voice lessons. And they both went to some place called the Westminster Choir School in Princeton, New Jersey for 2 summers, which Tim and I remember pretty vividly. And the most notable thing about it was I remember seeing Albert Einstein walking across the Princeton campus one day while our parents were in school and we were wandering around the campus. So it was a wonderful musical beginning for the two of us. And then last, I'll simply mention that when I was a teenager, our father decided to pulled some of his old musical buddies together, and he started a band, and it was called Howard Wildman and his Dixielanders. And he installed me in the band as the trombone player. Yeah, so.
And a lot began with that. Jim and I each played in high school, but for each of us when we went to college, Jim kept playing a bit more than I did, but I gave up pretty much both instruments in college, both the piano and the trumpet. And Jim and I were living in different parts of the country and not able to see each other for the better part of 20 or more years. And then in the late 90s, I'd been talking forever about, well, I'd like to really learn to play jazz and learn a little bit of something about music theory, which I'd have to do to be able to play jazz. So Carol had heard just about enough of that because I talked about it a lot. And so for Christmas, when I was 50, she gave me a semester of lessons, jazz piano lessons at the Concord Community Music School. And I always say she might be a little ambivalent about that decision as things have turned out, because she's now a music widow. But Jim picked up his horn when I started back with the piano, and one thing led to another, and some years later we had a band together in Brooklyn called the J.T. Wildman Jazz Band, which is a band that over the last 11 or 12 years has done a couple of CDs. And the second one, we'd finished the whole thing, and some wonderful musicians in New York were part of that, are part of that band and part of that recording that we did in a studio in New Jersey. But I called Jim up and I said, you know, we had such great musicians and it's such a great album. And I think part of how we tried to make it great was to have the smallest possible footprint on it ourselves. And so I said, I think we should do something, just the two of us. So Whit Sims, who is also one of the founding members of the band and lived here in Concord and went down to Brooklyn for gigs with me, I called him up and we went out to the Henniker Congregational Church that has a great grand piano in it, and got permission to use that piano. And a local recording engineer and musician, Aaron Jones, came out and recorded us playing this song that we're about to do called The Nearness of You. And the title makes Jim and I remember that while we've lived a lot of our lives apart until the pandemic, we've always had this connection, forwarded all the way, the connection from growing up in a household of music. And so The Nearness of You is the title track of that second album, and we're going to play it for you now. Next, we're going to have another reading from Emilia Halstead, this one from Hebrew Scriptures, from the book of Ruth, a wonderful story of connection between women. Naomi, the mother-in-law, and Ruth, the daughter-in-law. And it's just a remarkably tender and powerful story of two women making their way in the world of patriarchy and being able to do well ultimately. And in this reading, it's the very beginning of the story of the book of Ruth that tells the essence of the story. So listen to Emilia Halstead read this reading now from the book of Ruth.
A reading from the book of Ruth, chapter 1, verses 1 through 19. Once upon a time, it was back in the days when judges led Israel, there was a famine in the land. A man from Bethlehem in Judah left home to live in the country of Moab. He and his wife and his 2 sons. The man's name was Elimelech. His wife's name was Naomi. His sons were named Mahlon and Chilion, all Ephrathites from Bethlehem in Judah. They all went to the country of Moab and settled there. Elimelech died and Naomi was left, she and her 2 sons. The sons took Moabite wives. The name of the first was Orpah, the second Ruth. They lived there in Moab for the next 10 years. But then the 2 brothers, Mahlon and Chilion, died. Now the woman was left without either her young men or her husband. One day she got herself together, she and her 2 daughters-in-law, to leave the country of Moab and set out for home. She had heard that God had been pleased to visit his people and give them food. And so she started out from the place where she had been living, she and her 2 daughters-in-law with her, on the road back to the land of Judah. After a short while on the road, Naomi told her 2 daughters-in-law, "Go back, go home and live with your mothers. And may God treat you as graciously as you treated your deceased husbands and me. May God give each of you a new home and a new husband." She kissed them and they cried openly. They said, "No, we're going on with you to your people." But Naomi was firm. "Go back, my dear daughters. Why would you come with me? Do you suppose I still have sons in my womb who can become your future husbands? Go back, dear daughters, on your way, please. I'm too old to get a husband. Why, even if I said there's still hope, and this very night got a man and had sons, can you imagine being satisfied to wait until they are grown? Would you wait that long to get married again? No, dear daughters, this is a bitter pill for me to swallow, more bitter for me than for you. God has dealt me a hard blow." Again they cried openly. Orpah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye, but Ruth embraced her and held on. Naomi said, "Look, your sister-in-law is going back home to live with her own people and God's. Go with her." But Ruth said, "Don't force me to leave you. Don't make me go home. Where you go, I go, and where you live, I live. Your people are my people. Your God is my God. Where you die, I'll die, and that's where I'll be buried. So help me God. Not even death itself is going to come between us." When Naomi saw that Ruth had her heart set on going with her, she gave in. And so the 2 of them traveled on together to Bethlehem. Here ends our reading.
I'm joined here by my wonderful spouse, Carol, who, again, like Ron, is usually on the other side of the camera for these events. She's a Jazz Sanctuary deacon and has been part of the creation of this with Ron and all the guys behind me from the beginning 5.5 years ago. I wanted to talk about connection, two parts of connection. First of all, Carol and I were both psychotherapists until our retirement, and we really spent our day exploring the dynamics of connection, not only in our clients' lives, but in those relationships. And then a little bit about our relationship with each other, which is now over 31 years old. So when we, in the 80s, both independently and together, became aware of the work of the Stone Center, Jean Baker Miller, and the 5 good things that come from relationship and connection, it was really kind of a discovery that changed both of us, I think.
Yeah, I think that historically the theories have always been more male-dominated, and this ended up becoming much more of a female-dominated theory around women and relationship, rather than seeing it and connection, rather than seeing it as necessarily a weak thing. It became over time, and as our work kind of evolved over the years, especially with mine, with mostly women, we both recognize the value of that connection, and both brought it into the way that we worked, but also into our relationship, and into our group life. Both Tim and I were in different psychotherapy groups. I was in an all-women's group, multidisciplinary women's group, and you were at one point in an all-men's group. So we use that theory, I think, in terms of developing very strong work relationships and work groups, within which to then do our own work with our individual clients or couples clients, in your case.
Yes, I saw a lot of couples, and what focusing on connection as the sort of engine of relationship did for me was to provide a way for me to help couples learn to track the connection and inevitable disconnections in their own relationships. Most couples that came to see me were reasonably disconnected when they arrived, but to not pathologize the disconnection, but to see that all life is an ebb and flow of connection and disconnection, but when you're disconnected, to learn the ways back to connection for you as a couple. And at the same time, we are in a blended family, and so began our life together with our own challenges for disconnection and connection in a family system with eventually 4 children. So it's just been a very powerful thing that life itself comes from connection, and that we all participate in that when we learn how to make strong relationships and communities based on that connection. So,
yeah, I just wanted to add one thing. I think connection and dependence for women, I worked in a women's sort of feminist collective, and dependence has always been seen as a negative. And so I think it's not just the connection, because there are a lot of dependencies in good connection, in not very good connections. But to value, rather than dependency, more like interdependency, and rather than dependency, more like differentiation, as the place of growth that can take place on your own, and needs to take place to some degree on your own, but also brought back to create a stronger connection.
Right. Yeah, the idea of the self in relation and the vitality, the sense of life that comes from being connected, and not a weakness, but perhaps life's greatest strength. Yeah.
And the mutuality.
And mutuality, yeah. When Carol had a big birthday a few years back, I wrote a song. I sang it at the time. I'm not going to sing it now. But in that song, the lyrics that I wrote had a lot to do with our twists and turns of connection and disconnection. It was a wonderful experience to write it. And we played at Hermanos a few times. We're going to play it now. And so it's simply called, very imaginatively, Carol's Song. We're coming near the end of our time together, and I'd like to read a prayer for keeping the world's story of connection. As I said in the beginning, this is a time when we all need to be mindful of not only being connected, but keeping the stories of our connections, the ones that we have now, the ones we've had in the past, and the ones that we hope for as we go forward as a human family. So let us pray. O Creator, whose longing for connection created all that is, lead us back to connection with you, with one another, and with all the creatures and creations with whom we share this universe. You know we are wanderers, making our way through life, looking, experimenting, falling, rising, inevitably wandering away from you, from everyone and everything, from connection. Wandering in attempts to take power, to dominate, to exact control through violence, to cause or perpetuate isolation, disconnection. Yet sometimes wandering into discovery and joy, finding ourselves and you in the wandering. We give you great thanks for this freedom to wander, wherever our wandering takes us. And we also give you great thanks for this amazing grace that finds us again when our wandering leads to lostness. The sense of life itself we receive from being connected is one of our greatest gifts. And when we are lost, then found by you and by one another in community, our spirits soar. We ask that you refresh our stories of these times of lost, then found connection, so that we and generations to come will remember the paths to reconnection that we describe in writing, or images, or music, or myriad other forms of storytelling. In telling our stories, we tell your story, Creator. That story of your longing for connection that started and sustains life itself. Thank you for times like this, when we can stop and share stories and simply be. Our worship of you is an approximation of the work of reconnecting to be done in a world characterized too much by fear, division, and disconnection. May we carry this worship into that work today and tomorrow and to all the days to come. Amen. We have one more chance to have a connection with our wonderful Emilia, and it's an amazing song that she does without accompaniment often and does it beautifully, Over the Rainbow.
Somewhere over the rainbow, way up high in the land that I heard of once in a lullaby. Somewhere over the rainbow, skies are blue and the dreams that you dare to dream really do come true. Someday I'll wish upon a star and wake up where the clouds are far behind me, where troubles melt like lemon drops away above the chimney tops. That's where you'll find Dream that you dare to dream really do come true. If happy little bluebirds fly above the rainbow, why, oh, why can't I?
Music can help to create community. We've certainly implied that all throughout this video. But sometimes certain pieces can really create a focused community. And right now, the community of justice and peace and compassion that we all long for is summarized, I think, no better than it is in this closing song. We hope you'll join us again next month. I think next month we'll actually do a live Jazz Sanctuary here on my driveway and then put it up on YouTube on the third Sunday of the month. So you can look forward to that. Or if you're in Concord or in the neighborhood, I'll be posting on Facebook when that will occur. So thanks for joining us today, and be well.